Okay, this is Unit 3, Lesson 29. It's pretty much the final lesson of photosynthesis, and it discusses different types of photosynthesis. We started this lesson yesterday, and I'm going to go over it before we continue it. What you're looking at here is a cross-section of a leaf. If you were to cut a leaf in half, left side, right side, this is what you would see inside. This region here are the mesophyll cells. That's going to come in handy for later. And then these cells, which I'm highlighting in blue, are bundle sheath cells. Let's see. Down here, you have guard cells, which can open and close the stomata, which are on the bottom of a leaf. And then finally, as I just said, you do have these openings, which are called stomata. CO2 enters, oxygen exits. And sometimes water exits when conditions are pretty hot and dry. These sections are what the bundle sheath cells are surrounding. It's called vascular tissue. If you have ever taken a leaf and you've kind of just been bored and you're peeling it away and you have the veins on a leaf, like the veins in your hand or your arm, those veins are the vascular tissue of a plant, the xylem and the phloem. Xylem goes up from the roots, delivers water to the leaves. Phloem goes down, delivering sugar from the leaves to the roots. What we started with yesterday is I wanted you to envision a hot and dry climate. Evaporation rates are very, very high. And a lot of you said that when evaporative rates are very high, the stomata will close. Now, remember in this class, you can't just say what will happen. You have to explain why. So why would stomata close in a hot, dry environment? Anyone? To save water. Can you recall what the term is for the evaporation of water from a plant? Transpiration. About 10% of all evaporation is transpiration. Plants don't like having their water taken. So when they close their stomata, the good thing is that they will not experience any more water loss. The bad news is they're not going to be able to get oxygen out or CO2 in. And that is where the problem starts. The enzyme Rubisco, which can fix CO2 to REBP, will actually use oxygen in the absence of CO2 for the Calvin cycle. This is bad. It is wasteful, it is inefficient, and it limits glucose production. I have nothing good to say about photorespiration. There's no pro and con with that. And this is a disadvantage in very hot, dry environments. So we're going to continue this lesson, and I want to go over the 3 different types of photosynthesis that we know of. And it's all based on how plants have evolved and adapted to their environments in which they're found. If you go into a redwood forest, you find a lot of pine trees, a lot of sycamore trees. Over the summer, I went to San Francisco, and just outside San Fran, there's the redwood forest. It's a national park. Really cool. Biggest trees you'll ever see. But if you go just next door to California, which is Arizona, you got cacti, you got Joshua trees, really, really dry environments. And the trees are totally different because it is an entirely different climate. And so life has to adapt to the climate. When we get to Unit 7, you guys will learn that the #1 driver of evolution is the environment. Everything adapts to the environment that they live in. So plants adapt to the environment that they live in. So let's go over the 3 types of photosynthesis. The first type is called C3 photosynthesis, and the plants that do this are known as C3 plants. This can be referred to as normal photosynthesis. It's the most common. It's typically seen in parts of the world where you actually do experience all 4 seasons: spring, summer, autumn, winter. In Florida, we really don't experience all 4 seasons. Yes, it gets a little cooler in the winter, but for you guys, 60 degrees might be cold. If you told a relative up north that you're cold in 60 degrees, they'll probably slap you. 60 degrees is a heat wave up north during the winter time. 40 degrees is a heat wave up north during the winter time. The reason why it is called C3 photosynthesis is that a 3-carbon molecule is produced. Can you recall what that 3-carbon molecule is during the, like when you go halfway through the Calvin cycle? G3P. The name of that carbon molecule is G3P. 1, 2, 3. 3 carbons. This is why it's called C3. Because the goal is making a 3-carbon molecule. So here's the good news. I don't really have to teach you anything new with this because what you've been doing for the last 2 days is C3 photosynthesis. When we did the Calvin cycle on Tuesday and we did CO2 fixation, CO2 reduction, regeneration of REBP, that is C3 photosynthesis. So I really don't have to teach you anything about that. That's new. But here is the downside. This form of photosynthesis is prone to photorespiration. And that is the use of oxygen instead of CO2 during the Calvin cycle. Not good. Recall that anytime you see the word respiration, what gas is involved? Oxygen. Whether it's the respiratory system, cellular respiration, a respirator, anything that has the word respire or respiration or respiratory refers to oxygen. Okay, finally, before we map this out, this form of photosynthesis is advantageous in moderate temperatures. It is disadvantageous in hot, dry climates. So I'd like us to draw the Calvin cycle once again. The Calvin cycle that you have been taught is C3 photosynthesis. So we can do this probably in a couple minutes. We got CO2, CO2, CO2. What is the name of the 5-carbon molecule that's already in the Calvin cycle? REBP, ribulose bisphosphate. And what enzyme fixes CO2 to REBP? Rubisco, ribulose bisphosphate carboxylase. And what is 5 plus 1? 6, obviously. So 5 carbons plus 1 carbon makes 6. What happens to these C6 molecules once they've formed? They break apart because they're just unstable. Can you recall what these 6 molecules of 3 carbons each are called? Think of golfing. PGA. Phosphoglyceraldehyde. That's where phospho P, glycer G, aldehyde A. Okay. ATP and NADPH from the Calvin cycle are going to interact with each of the PGAs. And what does PGA get converted into? G3P. How many G3Ps lead the Calvin cycle? And what will it contribute to make? Glucose. So how many times must you go through the Calvin cycle to make one glucose molecule? Twice. ATP will then interact with the 5 remaining G3Ps that are in the cycle and reshuffle them to form REBP again. That is the Calvin cycle. And that is also C3 photosynthesis. It's not too complex. Just draw it until it really starts to sink in. I do, however, want you to know that this process takes place in mesophyll cells. All right. We'll let you guys catch up. We'll move on to the next type of photosynthesis. Are there any questions about this? There's really nothing new. The only thing new I'm telling you is that this Calvin cycle is also referred to as C3 photosynthesis. That's it. The reason why, make sure I'll make this very clear. The reason why it is called C3 photosynthesis is because the goal of the Calvin cycle is to make G3Ps. And how many carbons are there in a G3P molecule? There are 3 carbons. That's why it is called C3. If there are no questions, let's move on to the second type of photosynthesis I have on deck for you, and that is going to be C4 photosynthesis. This is a type of photosynthesis that is great for dry, hot climates. A polar bear is not great for dry, hot climates. A polar bear is great for cold, frozen climates. Life adapts and evolves to the climate and environment in which it lives. I'm sure that some of you have gone on vacations to distant places and you may not have been paying attention to it, but perhaps if you think back on it, I can assure you that animal forms and plant forms, organisms that are present where you visited are not the same here. If you've ever gone on an Alaskan cruise, you're not going to see an alligator swimming in the water. And if you've ever gone on a little nature walk in Florida, you're not going to come across a moose. Life adapts to where it lives. Well, the plants that live in very dry, arid environments have adapted to those conditions, and this is the result of it, C4 photosynthesis. The great thing about this is that it prevents photorespiration. I had nothing good to say about photorespiration, and this plant lives in a very, very, very tough environment. It cannot risk any loss of energy or inputs that it requires. So it's not going to go through photorespiration. I'll show you how. It is ideal for hot and arid means dry, climates. It occurs in 2 stages. So let's draw it out. Here we have CO2, 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 3 CO2 molecules at a time. Over here, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. These are not RUBP. RUBP has 5 carbons. These molecules are called PEP. You actually have seen these before. You saw these in glycolysis, which is part of cell respiration. What is 3 plus 1? 4. This is why it's called C4. There's a new enzyme in town before you get to Rubisco. It's called pepcase. Let me tell you a little bit about this enzyme. The enzyme fixes CO2 to PEP. It avoids oxygen. So if it avoids oxygen, is it going to do photorespiration? Absolutely not. It will not. This is the benefit. It will not interact with oxygen, hence it will not perform photorespiration. So uh, 3 plus 1 is 4. This is why it's called a C4 photosynthesis, because you want to make these types of molecules. Now, I'm sorry for the name of these. The name in here is just annoying. It's not scary. It's just annoying. O-oxal O-acetate. It is a C4 molecule. This is why this is called C4 photosynthesis. This is it. There's nothing tricky here, guys. 3 plus 1 is 4. Oxaloacetate is going to drop off those carbon dioxides for the second half of this process, which is the traditional Calvin cycle. So before I go to that second part, let you guys catch up. I also want you to know that this takes place in the mesophyll cells. I did it again. Are there any questions on this process? Any at all? Yeah.
So this happens before the Calvin cycle?
This happens before the Calvin cycle. Correct. You've got it. Anything else? If you didn't hear that question, the question was, does this happen before the Calvin cycle? The answer is yes. And the other question was, does this have to happen before glucose can even be made? Yes, this does. Yeah.
Does this only happen to plants that are in a?
It generally just occurs in plants that are in a very hot and dry environment, because this form of photosynthesis is not very ideal for moderate climates that do experience all 4 seasons and have cold times of the year. Anything else? I like the questions. Julia? It's after light reaction. It's after light reaction. All right, let's do part 2. It's the traditional Calvin cycle again, guys. Got to draw it again. I had someone earlier today say, we got to draw it again. It was a football player. Like, Chase, how many times do you guys in football have to run the same play in practice? Always. Do you know why your coaches do that? Repetition. Repetition really helps the brain understand something. Don't you have to be driving for a year before you can get your driver's license? Yeah, repetition helps. They're not going to have you drive one time and here's your license. You got to figure it out and go through the process. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. This part of photosynthesis takes place in the bundle sheath cells. And this is your traditional Calvin cycle. And I have an analogy for you that may help you understand why this is the way it is. I'll let you guys catch up and I'll give you that little analogy, and then hopefully you might be feeling that, oh, I get it. Yeah, Julia. They're the only that's the only type of photosynthesis where there is a process of consequences in the bundle sheet. So yeah. They can close their stomata, and here's the thing is that they may have photosynthesis delayed, but they're not going to do photorespiration as an alternative. And that's going to just waste other resources. So these types of plants live in very, very, very tough climates, very tough environments where you can't afford to lose a scrap of what you need. So because of that, photorespiration has basically been selected against. That's natural selection. Because there are limited resources, you're not going to have a maximum amount of glucose. If you've ever been to the desert, you don't see big, giant, beautiful trees. They're typically a lot smaller with less leaves because there's limited resources. And because of that, they will not have as much glucose and not as much photosynthesis as places that do have enough water, that do have enough sunlight and enough carbon dioxide. Because typically in these environments, there's not a lot of water. So they're not going to have as much leaf or greenage on there. Anything else? Okay. Let's see. I think that's all of it. All right. And now let's get to the last type of photosynthesis I have for you today. It is called CAM photosynthesis. You do not have to know what CAM stands for, but just in case you're curious, here's what it means. I have to look this up because it's, make sure I get the spelling right. Crassulacean acid metabolism, CAM. The types of plants that produce this type of acid and break it down are called CAM plants. A pineapple tree is an example of a CAM plant. These plants do different parts of photosynthesis at different times of the day. So they are a type of C4. But here's how this is different. At nighttime, when do you think the stomata are at night? Open or closed? Yeah, there's no reason to have them closed at night. The sun's down, evaporation is stopped. Puddles don't evaporate at night. Stomata are open. CO2 enters the plant. And think back to the C4 diagram that you just did. What does CO2 get fixed to in a C4 plant? Look back at your drawing. What does carbon dioxide get fixed to in a C4 plant first? PEP. CO2 is fixed to PEP. And then everything stops. The C4 molecules, which are oxaloacetate are stored in a, can you recall what organelle is used for storage? A vacuole. So I want to tell you why this happens. Why do we have to stop there? What do you need to make the Calvin cycle spin round and round? You need ATP and you need NADPH. Where is ATP and NADPH made? Light reactions. Can you do the light reactions at night? No, you can't. This is why photosynthesis stops at this point at night. And then once the sun rises, everything goes back on track. So let's do daytime. At daytime, light reactions are in full effect. ATP and NADPH are produced. Once that happens, CO2 is released into the Calvin cycle, and glucose is produced. By the way, stomata are closed during the day. And if someone in here, I know it's a Friday, I know you're kind of zoned out. You might, well, if the stomata are closed, how does the CO2 get used in Calvin cycle? Look back over for the nighttime. The plant brought in a ton of CO2, and what did it do with it after it brought it in? It basically stored it until the sun rises, the stomata closed, and then it continues photosynthesis. Stomata are closed during the day. Okay, before we finish, CAM photosynthesis does some parts at night, some parts during the day. That's the big difference. And I mentioned an analogy I forgot to do to try to describe C4 photosynthesis for you, and then that will be it for today. So are there any questions about CAM photosynthesis? Okay, let me come back up here and tell you my little analogy. A couple nights ago, I was watching the movie The Batman, the newest Batman movie that came out. The guy that was in the Twilight movies is Bruce Wayne. You know what I'm talking about? The Riddler's bad guy. Well, there's a part in the movie where Batman is looking for the Penguin to question him. And the Penguin runs this club, this nightclub. So let's say here's the nightclub. Here's the entrance. Batman later learns that there is a club within the club. So let's just call this club squared. Can you enter the club within the club if you are not even allowed in the entrance of the actual club? No. That's the analogy I think kind of serves for this. Can oxygen get into here if it isn't even allowed to get past step one? No, it's not. That's the great thing about C4 photosynthesis is that over here, remind me from yesterday, can Rubisco add oxygen to RUBP? Yes, it can. And that's kind of dangerous. But in order for oxygen to get to Rubisco, it would have had to make it past this spot first. Now, will pepcase allow oxygen to get by? No, it won't. So oxygen is not going to make it to the second half over here. So that's why this part of photosynthesis, this type of photosynthesis is so much better for hot, dry climates because it does not let oxygen get through. And so zero photorespiration. Are there any other questions? Yes, Julia. It occurs in climates where, like islands, where you can have very different weather on one side of an island versus another. It's typically, so it rains, but it's also very dry because of all the jet streams and the breezes that just dry out the island. Hawaii is a good example because pineapple plants and pineapple trees are CAM plants. Anybody else? All right.